Today I'm eager to chat with Chas Mraz, a local beekeeper of Champlain Valley Apiaries. Chas and his family currently manage numerous bee colonies in the Champlain Valley. You'll also hear the latest buzz on how to take action. As someone working to make my yard as pollinator-friendly as possible, I can't wait to dive right into this episode. This is Vermont's Voice. Well, Chas, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Vermont's Voice.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm feeling really excited about this conversation because I'm a big fan of pollinators, bees especially, and I feel like I'm going to be learning a lot from you throughout this conversation. So really looking forward to it, and I think we should just get into it. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
Okay. So I'd like to start from the very beginning, like 1931, back when your grandfather, Chas Mraz, founded Champlain Valley Apiaries. So this is a family business that you have helped run since 2004. And I would love to know what has motivated you to continue this family tradition and also what the day-to-day life of a beekeeper entails.
Well, like much farming, the motivation isn't money. Bees, they become part of you. The importance of bees is so massive. And I couldn't walk away from them at these times when we're really struggling. One of the things my grandfather stressed to me and I learned from him is the power of observation. Bees are kind of, they say the bellwether, the canary in the coal mine. And I think it's really important for everybody to understand that we got to listen to what's going on. This is not normal. Bees are functionally, a colony should be able to live theoretically forever. Okay, when their queen goes bad, gets old, they do something called supersedure. They raise another one from her own egg. That virgin queen goes out. I'm not going to get into beekeeping because we'd be here 2 weeks, but the colony just continues seamlessly. And that's how we used to keep bees. We had beehives that, we did track every hive, but we had beehives that were in an odd place in the yard or something. And we would realize that it's been there 25, 30 years. We never re-queened it or any of these things we do now to keep bees alive and available for pollination nationally. That's really changed. We can't get a beehive to live longer than the life of a queen practically anymore. So we're talking beehives are living 2 years, maybe 3 years. And then the supersedure is not happening like it's supposed to, and the bees are dying. So in Vermont, we used to, if we had 10% winter losses, we thought, wow, that's a bad winter. Okay. Now we've dealt, the first spring I came back, my father had 1,200 colonies, and we lost 45% of them over the winter. That was our first major loss. The important thing to know about bees is they get rid of their own problems. We've never saved the bees. We've never given them a pill or something and said, oh, you're fine now.
Right.
Apis mellifera, apparently the honeybee specifically, has been on the earth for 45 million years. So they have a real ability to survive that we don't even come close to.
What?
Okay, Apis, bees have been around like 90, 100 million years since flowers started to flower. And so you look at that, they've survived the dinosaurs, scorched earth, ice ages. It's really what we can learn from them as a species is what we should be learning is how do you survive as a species? I don't think we're off to a great start. We've been around about, less than 1 million years, I think, Homo sapiens. And we've found all kinds of ways we could destroy ourselves, but we don't seem to be finding ways to keep us going. And so really the problem we're having now, and we're, experiencing 45, this year, I think our losses were over 60%. Wow. And nationally, it's the highest losses ever recorded for beekeepers, and it's throughout the nation. And one of the big things we haven't done anything about, and Europe did very quickly, and Quebec followed, and most of Canada is following now, is take care of the neonicotinoid pesticide issue in this country, which is just crazy. I don't know if you want me to keep going on this topic or you want to wait till the next question.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've teed it up really nicely, and I do want to talk about neonics next because, as you likely know, last year the Vermont legislature did pass a bill, now known as Act 182, to ban the use of those neonicotinoid pesticides in those treated seeds. So obviously, as you know, this is a very dangerous pesticide. It's known to negatively impact plant, animal, and human life. But my understanding is that you have a deep knowledge of the science behind these neonicotinoid or neonic pesticides. And so I'd love if you could share a little bit more about that, how these neonics are actually creating these impacts, just to give our listeners a better understanding.
Most chemicals have don't use this agrochemical when the plant's flowering, or don't use it, be careful which way the wind's blowing and stuff. There is no safe way to use neonicotinoids. Mm. And that's in my opinion, neonicotinoids really should have never been let out of the lab. They are way too toxic to be put into our ecosystem. And they're a small molecule. They can't be filtered out of water very easily or anything like that. Say you are a corn plant or a soybean plant. The idea was that you're going to put this chemical on the seed of the plant, and you're going to absorb the chemical and become systemic, part of the plant. Mm. So it'll protect the plant from bugs as it grows. And it's specific to the plant. Well, it's not, because the plant only absorbs 3 to 5% of it or something like that to that degree. Okay. And the other 95% in one way or another, whether it's dust off or through water, goes into our environment. And it's highly toxic. I mean, that corn seed, for example, I believe has 2 to 4 parts per billion of neonicotinoid on it. The plant's absorbing 3 to 5% of it, say. And is it protecting the plant? I mean, that's the toxicity that you're going to think about. It's like, trying to kill a mouse with a snowplow. It's a crazy situation. And what happens is it's very water soluble. It gets in the water and it goes way off target. And they're also targeting the plant, even if it's corn. People have to understand, when corn tassels, that's flowering. Okay, that, it's not a flower, but it's a flowering grass. Mm-hmm. And the male part is at the top and the other tassels are down below and so on. And it produces pollen. And bees do not ignore corn pollen, okay? Take it from a beekeeper. We even have films of this, okay? Pollen is the source of their protein, and they go after it. So they get directly affected by the plant that they're going to as well, because there are neonicotinoids showing up in the pollen. It takes somewhere around 0.1 part per billion, which I guess is 1 part per 10 billion, to affect a bee, okay? And it might even be smaller individually. And the problem is that sounds very small. Okay, well, how can that affect the beehive? Well, they're bringing this stuff back into the beehive. And there's a lot of sublethal effects. Our bees might be dying in the fall from something that happened, this time of year. And the other thing that it's doing, and what farmers need to understand, is the rhetoric that's going around is like, oh, this could be the end of your farms. You can't not use neonicotinoids. Well, we grew corn without neonicotinoids for a long time before neonicotinoids came into the market. Most farmers didn't even know they were there, if they're honest with themselves. I've talked to many back in 2014 who had no idea there was pesticide in the seed.
Wow.
So, and they're putting this out there, and even the EPA has come out and said it's of no economic benefit to the farmer. And the one thing that they should be very concerned about is Vermont farmers are doing all kinds of work, especially dairy farmers, people growing these row crops to improve their soils. So crop rotation, plugging the, plugging the seed in instead, and all different methods to try to improve the soil. And when you put this seed in the ground and the chemical migrates everywhere, you're killing your soil. So you can do all this work, this smart work, to try to improve your soil, and then you put the seed in the ground and your soil's going 3 steps back. And, it's been shown it kills the microbes in the soil. Now, microbes in the soil, very important for water absorption and nitrogen absorption. It's killing earthworms and beetles, all the things that are irritating your soils. I mean, I encourage people to go out in the cornfield they had last year, dig a hole and see what they find in there, and then go to one that's, is not effective, not downhill of it, and dig a hole and see the difference. And it's killing everything. There's an old saying, for every bad bug, you kill 7 good bugs, but you can't kill all the good bugs, and what's happening, bird populations apparently in the United States are down 65%. It's not species, but it's bird population. Field bird population, 70, 80, and 90%, depending on the species. So it's killing the bees. Well, is that important? Well, the USDA came out and said, row crops bees contribute to row crops 34 to 40% in production. Soybean is a flowering plant, for example. Bees go to it, to honey, for nectar, for pollen. Corn they go to for pollen. These chemicals don't just disappear.
Right.
And they're going to follow the way of the water. And they're going to go into your wells. And they're going, and all. And they found them in humans in cerebral fluid. And if you're eating or drinking water, you're ingesting neonicotinoids, which are neurotoxins. And, I mean, they are talking, is it a small enough amount that it doesn't hurt humans? Even if you couldn't prove that, is it a good idea to be ingesting neurotoxins? Farmers need to be careful who they trust. And you have to remember that these agrochemical companies, these big agro companies, they're trying to sell you something. And that's their goal. Mm-hmm. And if you want to follow the money in ag, you'll see where it goes. Okay, these companies make billions and billions of dollars while every farmer's squeezing the last penny. And they are trying to sell you something. Their objective is to sell you something. If you're taking your advice of how to farm your farm from them, you should maybe really reconsider. And you have to think for yourself. You have to do for yourself. And I encourage people to look into the science behind this because, like I said, even the EPA said it's of no economic benefit to them. It doesn't improve crop production. Okay? They were trying to sell it like a cheap insurance. Well, it's starting to kick back. It's killing your soil. So these things are happening and in real time. And, the bees are trying to tell. I, as a beekeeper, am trying to tell people that because, we've worked with dairy farmers for side by side for 100 years. And my father always said, you never have to explain to a dairy farmer the importance of pollination. Mm. And I think that's true today. I mean, pollination is foundational to agriculture. It's like water, sun, soil, pollination. Okay, this is Ag 101. And when one of those things is disrupted, there's a problem. And what I want people to understand is there's a problem, a big problem. And we need to do something about it. And it's been a huge problem for our industry. We've suffered. We've lost a lot of beekeepers. People have given up. A lot of hobbyists for sure, because it's just was too expensive and plenty of beekeepers and actually lots of beekeepers. But we've changed our industry. We're not really beekeepers anymore. We're bee producers. We're bee replacers. There's become a huge nuke industry. So the southern beekeepers can sell, bees to us up north in the right time if we're buying them. There's a lot of big problems that any farmer will understand with this. The bees that my grandfather actually bought in 1928 from Crane had probably been in Vermont 150 years before that. And what we were doing for all that time is genetics. Bees were getting genetically adapted to Vermont and our climate and our winters and how to hold their resources. There is nothing simple about this complex organism that is a beehive. And we had genetics that were just beautiful. Okay, when you breed for production, you breed for non-swarming bees because you want them to stay in the hive. You breed for all kinds of attributes over all this time. And we've lost so much of those genetics because they've just been wiped out. Your most productive hive is bringing the most crap in, and they go. And then it's just a downward spiral. Mm. And we manage, we build our bees back up in the spring. Right now, we'll bought some nukes, going to build our own nucleus colonies, of course, from our own bees, build the population back up. I've been doing it since 2004. And you go and you get knocked back down again, and you just do it over. It's like riding a bicycle against a wall. And it's a major problem. And the fact that a beehive cannot live continuously is a real alarm bell. And people need to listen.
Yeah, I'm terrified, and that's a lot to unpack there. But I want to go back to what you said briefly a moment ago about how you've talked to farmers and they had no idea that they were even using products with neonics in them. How have those conversations gone when you've had them? Do you feel like you're moving the needle on making progress?
Well, it was early when I had those conversations, 2014. I remember on Seedway, even I said there, and they said, no, they've always been there. He was telling me, and I said, no, but the coatings were there before the neonics were in them.
Okay.
Neonics, developed in the late 90s. They really weren't, but by 2003 or so, they were on like 90% of the corn seeds, and it was growing, and it went very rapidly. And, again, a farmer's decision on what kind of corn he's going to grow, he's concerned about the hybrid, the time it's going to take for it to mature, when he can harvest it, those practical things of farming, not that it has neonicotinoid seeds on it. She wouldn't have time to necessarily decipher all that, whether it was made obvious in the first place or not, I don't know. But when they really started hitting, that was 2004. So 2003, they'd obviously been here. And that's the same experience that Europe experienced back in, I think they banned some of these in 2015 or before. Not all neonicotinoids, but 3 of them, and seed coatings got banned. And, it's interesting. 2 of the big chemical companies are German, and they can't use these things in their own country, but they're spreading them here in America. The other big one is owned by the state of China, the Chinese state, I should say. Used to be Swiss. I won't name names. I'll let people figure out what it is. But farming is a little bit different in Europe in that farms will often have bees, livestock, growing corn. They're a little more diversified in what they're growing. We've had to monopolize what we do a lot. And so there wasn't this, dairy farmer, beekeeper, he's trying to take something away from me. They killed their own bees, and they were like, the French farmers drove their tractors down into Paris and protested right away. So they brought, their system works. Their system is different from ours. They have to prove that a product is safe before they put it out there. Our EPA system is very, very backwards. They kind of put it out there conditionally, don't monitor it, and then it's up to the public to decide, or people surrounded it like beekeepers to realize that something's wrong and go back to them, and then nothing is done immediately. Mm-hmm. So the European system is different. They're still growing crops like fine. Quebec stopped using neonicotinoids. I can't remember the date, if it was 2015 or 2018 they started. They haven't had a crop failure to this day.
Wow.
And you could speak to them. We had a podcast with Quebec farmers and a guy up there, and they talked about all this scare tactics that were out there, like that being done here. And unfortunately, I find our ag department repeating some of that, propaganda. And I really hope, I'd love to see our ag department get on board with this, because this is a win-win situation. This is a win situation for the farmers, okay? They're actually, long-term, they're going to be better off not using these things. That's absolutely true. And then, it could be a win-win for Vermont products. It could be a marketing thing. We're doing something about it. New York State is doing something about it. We're doing something about it. That's great. Trust me, the customer does not want to be consuming neonicotinoid pesticides. And if you look at the, whole picture of what, it's up to us to protect our market, because the chemical companies, big ag, who unfortunately, it's the same in Nebraska or Indiana as it is here. It's the same products we're buying. And we have to protect our own market. We can't allow these companies to dictate how we farm, and then destroy our markets, because they're not going to help us get back out of it. They're not going to take any responsibility at all, or try not to. I mean, they've already made moves, so they're trying to make sure they're not legally, when the hits the fan. If it does, and they're trying to already shelter themselves from lawsuits. It's the same corporate thing that's gone on forever. I mean, it's, cigarette companies, they even use the same law firms. It's unbelievable. And I think us as farmers, we're disadvantaged because we trust one another. And we think people are like us. And when you're dealing with some of these companies, you have to realize that you are not dealing with another farmer, we can be so easily taken advantage of. And it's terrible because we are easily taken advantage of because we trust in that somebody is doing the right thing,
right.
But their goal is to sell this product. It's like somebody trying to sell you a used car. It's not any different. They're trying to sell you something, and if you needed a fungicide one time, are they not trying to sell it to you 4 times? Okay. Do you really need to spray that spray again? Right. So it's awful. I mean, we're finding neonicotinoids, we know it's the most destructive chemical for bees since any chemicals. But we're also finding, as we're testing pollen and things coming into the hive, that we're finding like different agrochemicals, like 20, 30 of them in a sample. And it's shocking that bees, very importantly, they're like the little fairies that make our ecosystem work. They're the reproductive system for plants, basically. And they're going and they're touching our world everywhere. And they're coming back. And what they're bringing back is telling us a lot about what our world is. And I think no matter what the product, farmers, it's really important to all of us to use as little as possible of anything and not increase it. But the only way to stop the damage is simply not to use them. We got to use we have to treat fields. If there's a problem somewhere, it's going to be field specific. Get in there and do something, address that problem. It doesn't have to be addressed with neonicotinoids. There's a lot of options. There's, from organic options to other chemical options that are less problematic. But you can't just say one trick for all. These chemicals are being used prophylactically every year. Okay, they're a pesticide. And it's a pesticide application when you plant these things. But it's not viewed like that by the government, because somehow the seed companies managed to get the seeds classified as a treated article. So they're not a pesticide application. In some reports, they're not counted as a pesticide application. They're the largest pesticide application in the United States is when we plant these products, these seed coatings. By far the largest pesticide application, outstripping everything else. Okay? Roundup maybe get close, but that's the only broadcasted thing. And it's a pesticide application. Well, normally if it was a qualified, you have to show need to use it in the first place. You aren't going to use it prophylactically. That's integrated pest management. That's what people are trying, same with antibiotics. And this is it. We can't just use these things. First of all, they're going to fail eventually. I don't know if neonicotinoids will fail because what's happened is they just came out with something so toxic that I don't think anything can get. I don't even think bugs will eventually get immune to it like they have.
Wow.
And so
it's that bad.
It's that bad. And it's dangerous for agriculture.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not just dangerous for beekeepers. We know, I've been part of that. My family's been part of the agricultural community in Vermont for just shy of 100 years right now. And, I was overwhelmed. I was at a dinner for, it was Addison County Farmers Coalition, and someone got up to talk. I guess I'm not going to mention names because I don't want to burn any bridges with people. I really would hope they build some with me and try to turn this around and make it a positive thing. But somebody stood up and said, all this chemical lobbyist rhetoric that this will be the end of your farms, and whatever. And I raised my hand. It was question and answer. I said, I don't have a question, but I have to respond to that. And I told these big room full of farmers, people who've known my family forever, we know what's really going on in a nutshell. I talked just about what we were talking about now, the soil, these farmers know how important their soil is. They know how important pollination is, like I'm saying. We can't control the sun and the rain, unfortunately. But and what was amazing is that organization sent in a letter of support for the bill. And that was, I felt very proud that my agricultural community listened to me.
Yeah.
Because they trust me. I'm another farmer, and we have to keep those connections going. It's very difficult to talk to every Vermont farmer and have this conversation. But when I do, they aren't like, oh, no, those guys wouldn't do this. They're not dumb by any means at all. They understand that, they're trying to sell us something, and if it's affecting their soil and so on, and you're affecting a beneficial insect beneficial to your row crops. It's just a bad idea.
Right. Well, it sounds like you've been making an impact where you can, and I think that's huge. And just circling back now to the implementation of Act 182, as you briefly mentioned, and this is sort of the new law that we discussed earlier, just for our listeners. The Agency of Agriculture did recently release their draft rules regarding best management practices for these allowed uses of the treated seeds. And so there's going to be this public comment period starting soon where folks can sort of just voice their opinions about the rulemaking process. Now, you've touched on a lot there, so I can imagine what your public comment would be. But if you had to give like 2 or 3 lines right now in this moment, what would you want to say in that public comment?
So basically those rules are off the label of the product, and they're pretty typical of a pesticide rule. Don't spray when the wind's blowing, but they're not sprayed, they're planted, but even they dust off and planting. The end of the story is there is no safe use of neonicotinoid pesticides because of their nature. There is no safe use. They're going to go and They're going to go so far off site. They're going to do all these things. You can do all these standards. A lot of these were developed through, organophosphate things. You don't spray a crop when it's blooming and things, when bees are all over it. Yes, you don't. But they don't apply here. The only way to stop the damage with neonicotinoids, they're very long life chemicals as well. I mean, people think, well, if we get to this law in 2029 and we stop using these chemicals, the bees are all suddenly going to be better. I'm estimating it's going to take 7 or 8 years before we even see a difference, okay? Because we've been using these things every year for 25 years practically, and prophylactically. And we've done, my greatest hope is that the damage that's done can be reversed over time. There's probably damage that's been done that is not reversible, and that's tragic. The Vermont Ag Department has seemingly been pushing back on this, and I really wish they would grasp it, because it's a win-win situation. It's a win for the farmers. Mm-hmm. It's a win for the beekeepers, also farmers. It's a win for everyone. Here in Vermont, and as a marketing tool, we can start saying Vermont products, we're doing something about it. Now, there's a lot to do. Chemical farming, I mean, the chemical toxicity in farming has increased just hugely. And, I always wonder how much else is so unnecessary, because these chemicals were never necessary.
Right.
And, we're talking about, well, what are we going to replace them with? Well, they don't work in the first place. Why do you need to replace them? They don't contribute to the yield. What's the worry about replacing them? And in Quebec, they did replace them with some, but it wasn't all of them. And most of them didn't have this other pesticide on the seed. And in 2030, they're going to get rid of any pesticide allowed on the seed. The timing's wrong. It doesn't work.
No.
The coating helps the seed not rot in the ground. That's a physical quality of the coating. They have other things in there. They have, to protect the seed and so on. But the neonicotinoids don't need to be there. The seed might look the same as it did in the 90s. They were coated then as well, but it's not the same coating. You don't need the neonicotinoid there. The corn will still grow. The corn, you asked me about talking to farmers about that. I kind of skipped over that. And I let me go back to it. I talked to one farmer, and I talked to him about it. He says, I didn't know those were on there. But all I know is they grow like hell. Mm-hmm. And, corn grows like hell. Yeah. Why? Because it's a hybrid seed that you're putting in the ground, and we've managed to make that plant into a tremendous ag plant that can feed cows. Of course, we're making fuel out of it, which is probably a mistake as well. But for our dairy farmers, which is mostly what the concern is here in Vermont, they're feeding it to their cows to produce milk. And that's a very important thing, too. Their end product is consumed by humans, and I know they want to protect that. I know dairy farmers, and they're very concerned about that. They got away from bovine growth hormones and so on like this because they know their product's going to the consumer. Farmers do not want to hurt their customers or their neighbors. I don't want to hurt anybody. I would never take a penny out of a dairy farm. We rely on each other. Mm-hmm. Most of our honey comes from hayfields planted by farmers. The problem is even the hayfields are getting toxic. But it wasn't a conscious decision by farmers to hurt the beekeeper. That would never happen.
That's good.
It would never happen because I know the importance of pollination, and we've worked side by side. I've had bee yards on farmers' land for 100 years, almost 100 years. And it's a symbiotic relationship. It's agriculture. Yeah. And it's just crazy. And it's this rhetoric about, it's going to end your farm, it's going to do this, or, they try to pit people who are farming bees against people who are farming cows. It's just ridiculous. Go back to the basics here, guys. And it's crazy. And I will say that our own ag department needs to listen to its own people more and stop listening to outside influences outside of Vermont that have outside interest to make money.
Yep.
We need to protect Vermont farms. We need to protect Vermont farmers. We need to protect our markets. And I really hope that the Ag Department can realize that and we can turn this around to a great win for everyone.
I hope so too. And I was right that I was going to learn a lot from you today because I am just receiving so much helpful information from you right now. And so just a few quick notes from me. I will say that for our listeners, we will be sharing information in the episode description about how to learn more about the implementation process, what's going on with this new law, and how folks can take action if they'd like to. I also want to just note that something I feel like you've touched on a lot is the importance, this component, the intersectionality of the food. And so our campaign slogan for the Protect Our Pollinators campaign was no bees, no food for a reason. And so that's something that I certainly wanted to drill home that I feel like you've done a great job of connecting the fact that bee health is very much related to our food production. And also to the point that you've made about, how our ecosystems are changing, how the dandelions are going to be out for much longer. And
dandelions are apparently self-pollinating, but they still get bees. Bees work dandelions like crazy. It's a very important plant, but it's just funny you brought it up. It might not be the best example because they will turn to seed on their own, apparently. But
well, that's good to know. I didn't know that either.
It was funny because some people did, because of the specifics of dandelion. I guess it's kind of like a both-sex plant, or it's not typical of flowers. And I had scientists who are not realizing that it's a really important plant for bees because bees get a lot of dandelion honey. We don't see it in the jar because it's early.
Yeah.
They build up bees on it and a lot of pollen from it. And they couldn't understand why bees were working dandelion. And I'm like, so, another thing, listen to your farmers.
Yeah.
They do know things, bees will work corn, bees will, and so, yeah, that side. But you're going to see, especially apples that aren't in an orchard getting pollinated purposefully.
Huh.
The bloom's going to hang around longer.
Yeah.
It's going to take longer for them to get pollinated. But we're talking about crops only. But there's a lot in our natural world that is also pollinated by pollinators that are very important to our whole overall ecosystem. It might not be directly important to us because it's not an apple or whatever. It's not a piece of food that we put in our mouth. But it's extremely important to our entire ecosystem.
It's all connected, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't separate them. And, this is such an important issue because, I think if you talk what was the most important issue right now, people, environmental issue, people would say climate change. And that may be true. But climate change, it's a very, very difficult problem. This problem is in our hands. We can stop using these chemicals tomorrow, okay? And if we don't do it, this is an environmentally disastrous problem. We're planting hundreds of millions of acres throughout the United States. It's not just a Vermont problem. It's all over the country. It's all over the world, but a lot of the world has done something about it.
Right. So now it's our turn.
Yeah, it's past our turn. Something should have been done about it maybe in 2014. Something really it should have never happened. I think if the EPA and everybody had done their job correctly, it would have never happened because these things were proven from the beginning to be highly toxic to bees. They should have never been allowed out of there. But there is an incredible lobby that's going to try to prevent states and prevent the nation from making these changes. A greedy chemical lobby that does not want this to change.
Right. Well, it seems obvious to me what the next step is here, right? We need to get rid of neonics quickly, like yesterday, weeks ago, last year. And I imagine that the people listening to this conversation might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all of this information because it's not great what's happening. And I know, again, that the importance is let's get neonics out of the conversation here. But sort of in connection with that, adjacently, is there anything that people at home can do to promote healthy pollinator habitats at home?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you talk about
There's pollinator, gardens people could grow and things. They are important. They're more important than people realize. Even if you have a small garden and you have, if you research a little on the internet, pollinated gardens, you can use native plants only, even, or not restrict yourself that much. It doesn't matter. But they've done great. It's what you try to do with a pollinated garden is set up so something's blooming all through the season. You'll have your spring flowers, your late summer, your fall. And that's very important that bees have access to something all year long. And remember, pollen is as important as nectar. It's not all about honey. Pollen is their protein. That's how they raise babies. You can't raise bees on nectar. It's a carbohydrate. So that type of thing. And, I see these commercials about killing the weeds on lawns, and they all have a dandelion, and they're spraying the dandelion. Dandelion is not a weed to me. It's a wonderful little flower. It does amazing things for the soil. It's bringing nutrients up into your grass. I mean, don't try to have a perfect lawn. That's really important.
I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I know. My father used to say, if it's green, it's grass. And let those plants and flowers grow. Let the clover in. Let the, velvet, whatever it is in there. Let all those little flowers grow in there. Don't try to turn your lawn into a golf course or whatever. That's important. The important thing is we have to nurture nature, not fight it everywhere we're going. And you can nurture it and you can persuade it. You can do things over time. But the problem is we're fighting nature. And we have to work with it. We have to nurture our earth. Our earth is set up to work. That's the part of all the evolution over so many hundreds of millions of years. Things will work together. I'm not saying we'll ever get rid of agro-pesticides completely. That's because of the way we are. We have to monocrop. There's other things that really complicate this issues, but we could do tremendously better than we're doing. We can do a lot better than we're doing. And it's important not to blame the farmers for what's been happening, because this stuff has been handed to them. Unfortunately, a lot of the time they're taking their cropping advice from the company selling them the products and the seeds and so on. And I encourage them to question that.
Okay.
Because Vermont farmers are famously independent, so I don't think it's too big an ask. And make your own choices.
Yeah. Can I just say your words are so reaffirming to me, and I'm going to share this with everyone who has something to say about the pollinators in my yard. I really appreciate that.
Yes, but that is important, and you can do a lot. But basically encouraging them and not killing them, not killing their resources, and certainly not killing them. I mean, you could get them pretty much away from pesticides in your lawn, in your garden.
Good.
I mean, we have, what's the program on Vermont Public with in your garden? Great solutions to everybody's garden problems, and it seldom isn't to use a pesticide.
Yeah.
So we have great sources. There's great sources to raise a pollinator garden. There's great sources to try to keep your lawn chemical free. I'm not the expert on it, but there's a lot of information out there.
Great, and we'll share some with our viewers as well. So, Chas, it is clear to me that beekeeping is much more than just a job to you. It's clearly a lifestyle. It's something that you care very deeply about. I can tell just from talking to you. If you had to pick just one thing, what would you say do you love most about bees?
I think that they never stop fascinating me.
Mm.
And, farmers have a great love for whatever their animal creature they're farming. And a great responsibility, obviously. They can't go unfed. They can't go on, whatever it is. You can't go unmilked. There's a lot of responsibility in being a farmer. And that responsibility is very important now in bees because, if you lose the beekeepers, you're going to lose the bees. And the beekeepers are kind of the only thing keeping bees alive in this country right now. And that's a shame because, 30 years ago, if all the beekeepers dropped dead, bees would still be around. They would be in the trees, and without this chemical impact happening. They would have been able to maintain themselves. I mean, I was, in Africa, the bees are kind of wild. They swarm in and out of beehives, but they're fine. They can live on their own. But right now, they can't live on their own. They basically have to be replaced, and we're replacing, nearly half of our bees every year. That saddens me because these are colonies, which, it's like losing a cow or a calf that should have lived. Yeah. They all should have lived. They never should have died. And that's, of course, first we put it on us, but it's on me to spread this message, to tell people that this is what's going on. But the bees never cease to amaze me. And with things like AI and computer learning and all that, we're going to, in the future, get into levels with the bees that we've never been in before. I mean, a bee can basically taste 10,000 times what we can.
Wow.
Okay, they've used them to find landmines, and things. Trained them to locate mines because they can smell the explosive and locate it and not set it off. And it's just amazing. I mean, I can tell you amazing things about bees that most people don't know any bees are blown away. I know a lot about bees, but there's still so many amazing things to find out and to glean from bees. And we're going to get down to this other level because you wonder, a bee that can, like if I could smell 10,000 times better than you could right now, I could tell you what you had for breakfast.
Oh.
I could probably tell you how old you were to the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That sense is so incredible. They're looking like when a bee goes up to an egg that the queen lays, I mean, do they know on a genetic level what that bee is,
That is fascinating.
And I think that's starting to fascinate me now as the technology increases, that we're going to start to see at some deeper levels than we've ever experienced before. And the fact that they've been on Earth so long, people say, what can we learn from the bees? And what we can learn from bees is how to survive as a species. They have some very good lessons. It's not adopting their political order. They don't really have one. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not living like a bee does, but the way they have managed to survive and continue to survive it's in threat right now, which is really, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's just crazy. And look who's put them in threat. We have. And, compared to them, we're a bunch of dumb apes. I mean, if you think about it, if they measured intelligence by the ability to survive on Earth, well, you look into a beehive, you're going to get down on your knees.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's where I'd leave it, I guess.
Well, thank you, Chas. I feel like you've done such a great job of informing all of us. Like I said, I learned a lot from you. I really appreciate this work that you're doing, and I hope you just keep up the good work because it's so important and we need you.
We're going to keep trying.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's our episode. Big thanks to Chas for informing and inspiring us today. Don't forget to check the description box to learn more about Act 182 and how you can leave a public comment in support of a neonic-free future. Also, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and rate us 5 stars. If you have ideas for future episodes, email me at jhayden@vperg.org. That's JHEIDEN@vpirg.org. As always, a big thanks to my co-producer, Elijah. I'm Jordan Hayden, and you've been listening to Vermont's Voice. Take care and talk soon.